film opens by focusing on Saori, a devoted single mother navigating life after the untimely death of her husband. Her world revolved around raising her son, Minato, and her dedication to him was unwavering, seeing him through his formative years. Saori and Minato were watching a building blaze, its flames flickering ominously against the night sky. Amidst the somber scene, Minato posed a peculiar question that immediately unsettled his mother. If a human brain were to be exchanged with a pig's brain, would the entity then be considered human or a pig? Saori, taken aback by the profound and unusual inquiry, gently pressed him, asking where he had heard such a thing. Minato casually replied that he'd heard it from his teacher at school that morning. After Minato left for school each morning, Saori would head to her work. One day a colleague had been gossiping, mentioning Minato's homeroom teacher, Hori-sensei, who frequented hostess bars staffed by sexy girls. Saori, attempting to rationalize the teacher's behavior, had mused that perhaps he was just lonely after long, tiring workdays. Upon returning home that evening, Saori was startled to find Minato behaving strangely again. This time, he had drastically cut his own hair. Saori, baffled, questioned him about it, but Minato offered no clear explanation, his silence more perplexing than any answer. Later, after coming home from her evening shift, Saori noticed one of Minato's shoes was missing, yet she held her tongue, choosing not to press him on it immediately. The story then shifted to a family gathering, a poignant celebration of Saori's late husband's birthday. During the event, Saori gently encouraged Minato to share details about his life at school, perhaps hoping for a glimpse into his world. The next morning, as Saori prepared Minato's lunchbox, she was bewildered to discover some soil nestled inside Minato's drink bottle. Minato, however, quickly offered a seemingly innocent explanation, claiming it was merely for a brief science experiment. As night fell, Saori's worry intensified when Minato didn't return home. Desperate, she reached out to people she trusted, and after a frantic search, she finally managed to obtain some information about his whereabouts. Without further ado, Saori immediately made her way to the location where Minato's bicycle had been found. It was a rather eerie place, tucked away from the bustling city, with a dense forest stretching into the distance, old decaying buildings, and a disused railway line. As she ventured deeper into the abandoned tunnel structure, a faint singing voice drifted to her ears, repeating, "Who is the monster? Who is the monster?" Upon hearing it more clearly, she realized with a jolt that it was Minato's voice. Despite the unsettling circumstances, Saori didn't press him for details, her primary concern simply being that Minato was now safe. However, not long after, Minato, on their way back home, for reasons unknown, made a sudden, inexplicable jump from their moving car that tragically landed him in the hospital. Fortunately, his injuries were not severe, and Saori, filled with relief, thoroughly checked on his health. As they walked home later, Minato inquired about the results of his medical examination. Saori reassured him that everything was perfectly normal, with no sign of any illness. Yet a strange look of dissatisfaction crossed Minato's face, as if he couldn't quite accept her words. It was then that Saori, her patience wearing thin, finally pressed him for the truth, demanding to know what had truly happened at school, why he had cut his own hair, and why one of his shoes was missing. Minato, his voice quiet, replied that his brain had been swapped with a pig's brain, claiming that was why he felt so strange, that he was a monster. Saori, of course, found his explanation nonsensical and incredulously asked him who had told him such a thing. Minato finally uttered the name, Hori-sensei. Saori's gaze then fell upon Minato's injured ear, and she grimly concluded that the cruel words had been accompanied by physical harm. That very morning, Saori immediately marched to the principal's office, reporting everything her son had told her. The principal merely took notes, then, to Saori's surprise, abruptly left the room just as a group of teachers arrived. Among the three teachers, Saori recognized one of them as an acquaintance. She questioned why the principal had left so suddenly, and her acquaintance quickly explained that the principal was in mourning, grieving the recent death of her grandchild, tragically caused by her own husband. Although still taken aback by this revelation, Saori decided to put it aside. Crucially, throughout this initial meeting, Saori still hadn't come face-to-face with Hori-sensei. In their next meeting, Hori-sensei was finally present, his appearance seemingly different from what Saori had imagined. The teachers immediately offered their apologies, with Hori-sensei leading the contrite chorus. But in the midst of his apologies, he uttered a word about misunderstanding, which instantly riled Saori. She sharply interjected, emphasizing that if it wasn't a misunderstanding, Then what was it? The principal, perhaps trying to de-escalate, suggested that perhaps the story given by Minato was inaccurate. Saori, undeterred, directly confronted Hori-sensei, demanding a straightforward answer, whether he had hit Minato or not. The principal swiftly cut off the exchange, instead reading from a report that stated there was contact between Hori-sensei's hand and Minato's nose. This vague acknowledgement only solidified Saori's conviction that Hori-sensei was indeed a bully. Furthermore, Hori-sensei's dismissive demeanor, even casually eating candy without a hint of guilt, compounded her anger. He even went as far as to suggest that housewives tended to worry too much, a comment that deeply wounded Saori. It became increasingly evident to her that the teachers in that room were actively trying to conceal something. The whole situation felt profoundly unsettling. At the convenience store, Saori coincidentally spotted the principal. As a kid passed behind her, she, clearly on purpose, lowered her feet, causing the little girl to tumble to the floor. Surprisingly, the principal showed no sense of guilt and instead showed a smile on her face. Later, upon returning home, Saori again observed Minato's strange behavior, immediately suspecting Hori-sensei of having somehow caused it. Knowing that, the very next day, she returned to Minato's school. Before even reaching the teacher's room, she caught sight of Hori-sensei doing something that looked suspicious. Once in the teacher's room, the principal stated that Hori-sensei was not there, claiming he was outside, but Saori, having seen him just moments ago, flatly denied it. Growing increasingly frustrated, she asserted that while not all the teachers were bad, some were, and pointedly alluded to the principal herself, having seen her doing what she did to a kid the previous night, implying hypocrisy. Feeling that she wasn't getting any definite answers, Saori immediately went to look for Hori-sensei and found him. Hori-sensei then posed a startling question, asking if Minato was hiding a weapon or knife. It was here in this conversation that a shocking truth began to emerge. Minato was not just a victim, but a bully, often tormenting his rather girly-looking boy classmate named Yori. Back home, Saori remained preoccupied with Hori-sensei's disturbing words. As she entered Minato's room, her gaze fell upon a lighter tucked away amongst his belongings, a detail that ignited further unease. When an opportunity arose, Saori sought out Yori. The boy Minato was suspected of bullying. Despite finding no one else at Yori's home, it didn't deter her. Once inside, she spotted Minato's missing shoe, confirming her son's presence there. Later at school, Yori was pressed to admit if Minato had been bullying him. Yori, however, vehemently denied it. Instead, he shockingly claimed that Hori-sensei was the one who frequently beat Minato, and that the entire class was aware of it. At this point, the conflicting accounts blurred the line between who was wrong and who was right, leaving Saori deeply confused. After the swirling accusations and mounting pressure, Hori-sensei eventually admitted to his actions in front of the students' parents and was consequently expelled from the school. Just when Saori felt that everything was finally settling down, things began to crumble. The very next day, during a storm, Saori awoke to find Minato was not at home. Her heart pounded as she then heard Hori-sensei's voice calling Minato's name from outside. Suddenly, the story abruptly shifted, beginning again from Hori-sensei's perspective, starting at the same time the mysterious fire occurred at the beginning of the film. Hori-sensei was then with his girlfriend, who worked at the hostess bar. He found himself constantly having to deny the pervasive gossip, suggesting he frequented the hostess bar because he was lonely. It turned out the rumor had originated from one of his own students, who had been live streaming. The following day at school, Hori-sensei paused to help Yori, who had stumbled and fallen. Later, while teaching in class, Hori-sensei was depicted as a dedicated and capable educator, a stark contrast to Saori's earlier perception. This was further evidenced when, returning to resume his class, he found Minato inexplicably raging in the classroom. In the chaos, Hori-sensei accidentally elbowed Minato's nose, causing it to bleed. The scene was notably devoid of any deliberate rough treatment, concluding that Hori-sensei was, in fact, a good teacher. One day, Hori-sensei was utterly surprised by the news that Minato's mother, Saori, had come to protest his actions. Other teachers quickly intervened, forbidding Hori-sensei from meeting with Saori, convinced it would only escalate the problem. But despite their warnings, he initially refused to accept their decision, determined to tell his side of the story. However, after a school official informed him that Minato intended to take a transfer test for another school, and that any official bullying incident on his record could prevent him from taking the test at any school, Hori-sensei finally relented, sacrificing his own reputation for Minato's future. Hori-sensei soon found himself explaining to the principal that he had merely accidentally elbowed Minato's nose, and that was the full extent of the incident, nothing more. But to Hori-sensei's surprise, the principal seemed oddly indifferent to his explanation. What truly bewildered him was her behavior during the rehearsal for an upcoming parents' meeting. She was inexplicably focused on showing a photograph of her grandchild. When Hori-sensei later confided in a fellow teacher, who happened to live near the principal, he was told a disturbing rumor. It wasn't her husband who had harmed her grandson, but rather the principal herself. One day, Hori-sensei visited Yori's home and found Yori's father there. The father, who looked clearly stoned, declared that Hori-sensei needn't worry about his son, as he would take full responsibility. He then chillingly stated that Yori was a monster, even echoing Minato's earlier bizarre phrase. Mentioning his son's brain was a pig's. The father, with a disturbing sense of purpose, explained his plan to turn him back into a human. Hearing this, Hori-sensei could only barely suppress his shock. Back at school, he encountered Minato suspiciously running from the toilet. Upon entering, Hori-sensei found Yori locked inside, singing the haunting refrain, "Who is the monster? Who is the monster?" This incident further solidified Hori-sensei's growing belief that Minato frequently bullied Yori. On that very same day, precisely when Saori arrived at the school and spotted Hori-sensei outside, he had actually gone to investigate a report from his student about a dead cat behind the school. 2 days later, Hori-sensei was blindsided by the news that Saori had hired a lawyer against him, which meant he would automatically be expelled from school. Despite everyone knowing Hori-sensei's innocence, no one, including the principal, stepped forward to defend him. At the subsequent meeting attended by numerous parents, Hori-sensei finally realized he was being used as a scapegoat to preserve the school's reputation. With a heavy heart, he reluctantly admitted to actions he hadn't committed. Hori-sensei's suffering didn't end there. His girlfriend, whom he desperately needed, also abandoned him. Overwhelmed by this relentless wave of problems, he finally decided to seek out Minato for an explanation, confronting him with everything that had transpired. He even went as far as to ask Minato if he had made a mistake. Minato, his voice tinged with fear, denied it, which was, in fact, the truth. Tired of it all, Hori-sensei eventually climbed to the roof of the school building, intending to end it once and for all, but then he backed down as he remembered something. Upon returning home that night, when he accidentally spilled water and saw Yori's essay, he suddenly realized the profound truth. Minato had never bullied Yori. This revelation sent a jolt through him. He immediately raced towards Minato's house to apologize, getting caught in the pouring rain. But when he arrived, Minato wasn't there. Hori-sensei and Saori, finding themselves united by a common concern, decided to search for Minato together at the place where Minato had been found the other night, the old train tracks. On the way there, as they confided in each other, they finally understood that the entire ordeal had been a profound misunderstanding built on misinterpreted events and half-truths. Upon arriving at the location, they discovered a terrifying landslide. Of course, they immediately panicked, but pushed through the debris, continuing their desperate search for Minato. Saori, her voice trembling, then asked Hori-sensei what Minato had meant by being reborn, questioning if Minato had intended to commit suicide. Their frantic search led them to find an old train car, wrecked by the landslide, all covered in mud. They desperately tried to get inside, but when they peeked inside, they found no one but only Minato's poncho. The story now shifted, beginning again from Minato's perspective. On a morning when he was heading to school, he met Yori, and they exchanged a few casual words. Suddenly, another student named Kamada appeared, immediately disturbing Yori, while Minato remained conspicuously silent. It became clear at this moment that Kamada, not Minato, was the actual bully tormenting Yori. After lessons concluded and during cleanup, Hori-sensei asked both Minato and Yori to move some items. Once the room was quiet, they began to converse, revealing that they were in fact friends, but they had this strange promise not to speak to each other openly at school. That same night, at home, was when Minato strangely cut his own hair. The following day at school, Kamada defaced Yori's desk and urged Minato to join in. Minato passively complied for a bit, but feeling it was becoming too much, he deliberately diverted attention by creating a ruckus, causing him to go berserk for no reason just as Hori-sensei arrived. Later after school, it was evident that Yori and Minato shared a close bond and often played together outside of school. It was then that Yori brought Minato to their special spot, the old train car at the abandoned tracks. The next day, during playtime at school, they ventured out and tried to burn a dead cat they'd found. However, feeling it was wrong, Minato ultimately doused the flames. This incident was also the reason for the soil found in his drink bottle. The cat was also the one found by Hori-sensei. Back at school, the story finally clarified that it was Kamata who had locked Yori in the toilet. Coincidentally, Minato was present. Yori had pleaded for help, but Minato, paralyzed by fear in the presence of others at school, hadn't intervened. When Minato ran off, that was when he encountered Hori-sensei. Later, during their playtime at the abandoned train car, Minato, believing Hori-sensei to be a good person, had suggested Yori report the incident to him, but Yori had refused. Here, it was also revealed that Minato had never heard Hori-sensei call him a pig brain or imply his brain was swapped. Instead, it was Yori who had been called pig brain by his own father. After school, Minato and Yori played together, returning to their secret base at the old train car. They meticulously decorated it to make it pleasing to the eye and painstakingly wrote a reversed message for Hori-sensei, explaining that Kamata was the true bully. This was the paper Hori-sensei would later accidentally read. They continued to spend time together until Minato felt a strange unease and decided to go home. The scene vaguely implied that their friendship had begun to shift to a queer love. The next day at school, Yori was again targeted by bullies, but this time, Minato bravely defended him. This was also how Minato sustained the injury to his ear. When he went home, feeling guilty about not helping Yori earlier, he went to the old train car, hoping Yori would be there. He waited until nightfall, but Yori never arrived. Minato decided to send a message and Yori eventually replied, saying he was on the way. As Minato waited on the road, precisely in the old tunnel, singing the haunting, "Who is the monster?" refrain, he heard a familiar voice. It was at that moment that Sayori arrived to pick him up. But simultaneously, Yori had also arrived, only to immediately depart upon seeing Sayori. Later in the car, the reason why Minato had abruptly jumped out without thinking was finally revealed. Yori had called out to him. In a later poignant moment, Minato, desperate to reconcile with Yori, went to his house. There he met Yori and his father. Yori claimed that he was normal now and even had a girl he liked, but later said it was a lie, an action that later made him beaten by his father. The next day, precisely after Hori-sensei had been expelled, Yori was also absent from school. When Minato, burdened by his own troubles, was heading home, he unexpectedly encountered Hori-sensei. Later, Minato met with the principal. In that pivotal meeting, Minato, finally unburdening himself, dared to be honest about his own struggles, and he decided to go see Yori. As he stepped inside Yori's house, he found his friend, seemingly had taken a beating from his father, clearly bruised and half unconscious inside a bathtub. Seeing the chance while the devastating storm was brewing, they got away from Yori's house and ended up in their secret oasis, the train car. They paid the storm no mind and continued their play. As the landslide happened, they became trapped, but eventually found a way out. They found themselves out just as the weather itself seemed to improve, and they ran towards the blinding sunlight as if they were free from what suppressed them.